Society. You can find the Phoenix Psychedelic Society on Facebook and Meetup. On Meetup, it's called Phoenix Psychedelics. And that's where we post all of our events and everything. And we also want to thank, the series has been going on every Monday night since February 20th. And our last talk is going to be July 17th. So we just have a few more weeks left of this, and it's been wonderful. Thank you all for coming. And one more announcement. The Phoenix Psychedelic Society filed the papers to be a nonprofit, a 501c3, so we're really excited to see how this is going to evolve over time. And we want to thank...
When are you going to have to start having services?
Well, it's a good, we'll discuss it. We want to thank Meraki Kava Bar for allowing us to use this space every single Monday night. That was very kind of them. And then, yeah, so we have Mary Lambdin talking about psychedelics and the subconscious identity. I'm really excited for this talk. Mary's new here. She's lived in Phoenix about a year and a half. So welcome, Mary, to this area. And she's a psychedelic integration coach, and you can find her online on Instagram at Mary's Mushroom Den 33. So welcome, Mary.
My name's Paul, and I'm an alcoholic. Oh, sorry, it's a different meeting. I wanted to do this. Some of you were here last week, some of you were not, but wanted to do something nice for Adam. Everybody knows Adam, and Adam does so much for the society, and so wanted to get Adam. If you missed it, we got him a mushroom coffee mug last week, and to go along with that, and I had it printed off this time, and with the little mushroom graphic here. So it is a $100 Amazon gift card, and it says, Adam, hope you enjoyed this Amazon gift card. Thank you for all you do for the Phoenix Psychedelic Society. If you guys could just put your hands together.
Mushroom shower.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you, Adam, for all that you do. I really couldn't feel more welcomed into this community, and that means quite a lot to me. So yeah, as Adam said, my name is Mary Lambdin. I'm an integration coach, and I'm kind of new to the Phoenix area. I'm from New York originally. I have a background in nutrition and psychology and holistic health studies, and I'm currently in school to become an integrative healing arts practitioner with yoga therapy modalities, which includes yoga body psychology, yoga nidra. So those are all things that I incorporate into my practice as an integration coach for psychedelic experiences. And while I think that psychedelic experiences are some of the most life-altering experiences that folks can go through and that need integration, I also think that integration can happen for anything that's life-altering. Move across the country, speaking from personal experience, or anything like that that's going to be life-altering. I've got a couple notes here so that I don't lose my train of thought, so if you see me looking down, that's why. I wanted to start off with an icebreaker, so that we can get acquainted to one another. I can get to know. I'm actually not going to use that. Thank you. We can kind of get acquainted to one another. I can hear from y'all, so I don't feel like a stranger up here. So I'm going to ask for folks to say their name and a word that comes to mind when you think of ego. So, anyone who wants to start?
Personality.
Justin?
And I'm the best.
Okay.
Right? Rigid.
Rigid.
Patty, natural.
Patty, natural.
Thomas, I.
Stephanie, attention.
Attention.
Gary, death.
Death.
George, devil.
Devil.
Isa, attachment.
Attachment.
Eric, separation.
Separation.
Mark, self-involved.
Self-involved.
Andrew, pride.
Pride.
Ben, tormented.
Tormented.
Deborah, arrogance.
Arrogance. Anybody else?
Kira, necessary.
Necessary.
Lucia, shame.
Shame. Wow. Well, yes, that is all over the place, all of those different interpretations of the ego. Makes a lot of sense. For a long time, I had a negative connotation associated with the ego. I thought that it was bad, you know, I was just like, oh, egotistical, shame, you know, all that. I'm gonna take everyone through an experience. I know there's some folks standing, but you can still do this experience standing. I'm gonna invite everyone to place their feet on the floor. Really getting grounded into this space. Either bring your eyes to a soft gaze or to close, whatever feels the most comfortable for you. And I'm going to invite you to connect with your breath. Inhaling and exhaling. And I'm going to invite you to feel the fire within your core of where your breath originates. Starting from your core, up through your chest, and out the mouth. And exhaling the same way, but reversed. Down through your chest, your ribs, your belly. I invite you to bring awareness to your right foot. Feeling the contact of your right foot on the ground. Moving to your ankle, your calf, your knee, your thigh, to your hip. Now locating your left hip, quad, your knee, your calf, your ankle, and your foot. Moving up to the right hand, wrist, forearm, elbow, upper arm, shoulder. Moving to your left, shoulder, upper arm, elbow, forearm, wrist, and hand. And connecting once again to your core, remembering to breathe here. Feeling the breath within your chest, your throat, feeling the crown of your head and the spacious light that comes through here. And I invite you to bring your attention to the point between your eyebrows, the third eye, which is the point of integration between our physical form and what exists outside of us. breathe into this space. Now on an exhale, float your eyes open if they're closed. I took everyone through a body scan just now. And this is to cultivate safety within the body. Because when we feel these feelings that we associate with words such as ego, our breath reminds us that we're safe existing here in our physical form. Because this is what's most tangible for us, is our physical form. So I'm going to discuss what my take is on the ego now. The ego is our identity. It's the conditioning, the stories, other people's agendas, kind of the stories that other people have bestowed upon us, and the ways that we've attached to our perception of the world. There's a concept that I like to call it manifest unity. I'm not sure that that's the exact phrase, but this is how I'd like to identify it. And this basically tells us that we're whole. And then once we're born, we become partial through our ego development, through that separation, the stories that other people bestow upon us, our identity. In this unity, this circle, that's ultimately source, or the divine, universe, God, whatever you prefer to identify. I'll just keep it simple and say source for the sake of this. And ultimately, this is what we're trying to get back to. As humans, we consciously make the effort to come back to this. Most of us that are sitting in this room likely have experiences on psychedelics that we've felt that sense of oneness. We've felt that soul glimmer, as I like to call it. That moment where we actually feel like we're back in unity after being separated for however long. So, I'd like to share a little personal experience that I had. I can't point to it, but I believe that they were psilocybe semperviva, and excuse me if I'm saying that wrong, but they're the little mushrooms that are in the corner, the top left corner of this poster. I took these mushrooms a few years ago, I'm gonna say 3 or 4 years ago, and they were really small. They were about the size of my middle finger, really tiny mushrooms, but they were very potent. And I had an experience that was really profound, something like I'd never experienced before on mushrooms. It was one of the most notable trips that I had. And I remember being folded into myself in this sort of fetal position, except it wasn't like over on your side. I had my legs up over my head and my knees were near my ears. And I was just like cradled into myself. And this felt so like primal. It felt like I was just this circling flow of energy happening. And I saw Alex Gray's Net of Being. And this is, I mean, everyone, raise your hand if you're familiar with Alex Gray. I'm sure most of us are. He's one of the best, most well-known psychedelic visionaries of our time. And the way that this approached me was really interesting. I was folded into myself, and I heard this. It started off with an auditory hallucination. It was like a whew sound. It happened to me twice. And as I was folded into myself and experiencing this in my mind's eye, I felt like absolutely nothing. Like, I don't even know how to describe it. It was just a nothingness. And my mind's very analytical, so after I had my moments, I came out of it and I kind of realized that wasn't nothing. That was everything. That moment of seemingly nothingness where I felt like not a human, essentially, it was everythingness. It was connection with my soul. It was connection with unity, the collective unconscious, the superconscious, whatever you'd like to call it. And it happened to me twice, and both times I was afraid, because that's the ego. So I call this an ego disintegration, an ego death, but I prefer ego disintegration, because it comes back, just disintegrates for a moment. Death kind of means that it won't come back, but the ego's always going to come back. That's part of what makes us human. So, when I was putting together this talk, I looked up what Alex Gray's interpretation of net being is. And we can all kind of assume what it is. I mean, maybe we can't, but I kind of started to assume what it is. But for the sake of this, I'll read a direct quote from Alex Gray. He says, net of being proposes an archetypal symbol for the networked self, an infinitely interconnected, transcendental node, seeing in every direction, part of a vast continuum of God selves. The value of the image is in its symbolic transmission of sacred interconnectedness, the collective unconscious. So, with that being said, what is the soul? The soul is our actual identity. We think that the ego is our identity because we identify with it so much, it's tangible. It's our closest thing to reality. It's the way that we perceive the world. The soul is passion. It's feeling compelled. It's our purpose. I mentioned soul glimmers before. We can have soul glimmers not in psychedelic experiences as well, though some of our most powerful and potent soul glimmers may be through psychedelic experiences. So I'm going to ask you, what are moments that you have had a soul glimmer, a moment where you feel like you're in flow state, so to speak, where you feel that sense of oneness, where you tap into something that's more etheric, less tangible? Yes?
When I meditate,
Meditation.
When you're doing
Watching the sunrise.
like near-death experiences.
Near-death experiences.
Just anytime things work out, really.
Alignment.
Playing sports.
Playing sports.
Being in nature.
Being in nature.
Dancing.
Dancing.
And music. Holding a newborn baby.
Music. Holding a newborn baby.
Being in the snow.
Playing in the snow. Is anybody else?
General synchronicities.
Synchronicities.
High dose psychedelics.
High dose psychedelics. I'll share with you a theory of mine. It's still kind of up here, but for the sake of this conversation, when I mentioned manifest unity, and a lot of these remind me of DMT, the chemical that our body releases when we're born and when we die. We're circular in those moments, those small glimpses, in those flow state moments. We can feel that again. So while psychedelics are an amazing tool, there are also all of these amazing non-psychoactive tools that still connect us in part to some psychoactivity. Bad trips. Raise your hand if you've had a bad trip. Okay. Let's say like a third of us have had a bad trip. I have an interesting take on bad trips. And I think that some people could probably identify with this. So, the way that I like to look at a bad trip is having our soul revealed to us in its rawest form. So, the soul brings with it a shadow, as does the ego. We're all familiar with the shadow self, yes? The shadow can feel very uncomfortable. To sit with the shadow takes a lot of work. And I like to think of it as like titrating. And when we're launched into an experience on a psychedelic trip where we see our soul in its rawest form, and then that's not what we identify with, even though that maybe it's our soul's purpose, maybe that is our actual identity. But our ego is like, no, this is supposed to be my identity over here. So when we can see the soul in its rawest, most primal form, the ego's like, what do I do with myself? And then starts the bad trip. The ego can't deal with the bad trip. And the psychedelics and the medicine is just trying to reveal what's really at your core. So I took everyone through a body scan earlier as a means to connect with your body. And I do think that the soul exists out here, but I also think that the soul exists in here, in our physical form, as our subconscious. For me, my soul exists in my solar plexus. It's how I make my decisions for things. So that's how I kind of have learned to move forward in life. I can't trust my mind at this point. I've learned that. So I make decisions from my solar plexus. So I want to ask you, whoever feels called to answer, where does your soul live within your body?
Sacral chakra.
Sacral.
The heart.
Heart. Heart. Did I hear another sacral over here?
Yes.
Sacral, heart,
Crown.
crown.
I feel like sometimes it sort of moves around a little bit.
Okay.
Sometimes it's more here, and sometimes it's like a little bit more up. Depends.
Yeah,
Sometimes it depends on where I'm at. Okay, I don't know.
that makes a lot of sense. It moves around.
Throat.
Throat,
I think it's everywhere.
everywhere.
Maybe stronger at time, but
I agree. I agree. Like I said, our soul exists everywhere. It's the collective unconscious. It's the wisdom body. It's the super conscious. You know, whatever you want to call it, whatever kind of philosophy you want to use to describe it. It exists out here, and it's circular, so it runs through us as well. I like that answer. So, in sum, a bad trip is basically the ego trying to hold on to a tangible reality because it's comfortable. It feels uncomfortable to be faced with our soul at times when we're not familiar with it. But it sounds like a lot of us can identify with where our soul lives within our body, or at least have some kind of vantage point for where it exists out here. Wholeness is not achieved by cutting off a portion of one's being, but by integration of the contraries, which is a quote by Carl Jung, one of my favorites. I know, it's classic, right? Cliche. I want to just kind of bring this whole conversation full circle. That integrating the ego means bridging the gap between the ego and the soul. Doesn't mean getting rid of the ego. We wouldn't be humans if that was the case. We have to have the ego in order to live this human experience. But the closer that we can get the ego to the soul, the more we can live in alignment with our true purpose. Psychedelics can be the catalyst for this. And I help folks to bridge that gap. Thank you. And I would love to take questions and offer discussion as well. So, yes.
So first of all, I love what you said about ego death. And actually, when you first started talking about the ego, I was like, I'm going to ask her at the end what she thinks about the term ego death, but you answered it. And I think I get it. I get why that term is used because when you really experience it, I mean, it's a definitive and complete break from what we typically think is ego. But I think that term can be a little almost dangerous because people can think that maybe it isn't going to come back,
Yeah.
but it always does. So that's not my question, but anyway, I completely agree with that sentiment. So I've been going down all kinds of different spiritual avenues this year, just exploring different thoughts and ideas. And I came across this one that said, we don't actually have an ego, we have many egos. And there's almost like this, and it's part of why it can be difficult to deal with ego sometimes because there's different egos, a lot of these egos in us that all are kind of like fighting and battling and kind of trying to maneuver us in certain ways. So, any thoughts on that? I thought it was an interesting idea since I hadn't really heard before, and I don't really have any other places to ask people about multiple egos. So yeah, any thoughts on that?
Multiple egos.
Or maybe
That's-
even like the multiple parts of your ego that,
Yeah.
that are fighting each other. They
That-
definitely use the term specifically multiple egos, but maybe there's something there because maybe multiple parts in your ego.
Yeah, the multiple parts resonates a little bit more with me because I do kind of stick, I do have, I don't even want to say that. I want to say that I have like a Freudian outlook when it comes to philosophy because I don't. It's much more Jungian. But the superego, the id, and the ego as the three in our mind, right? So I think maybe there's some play between the three. Multiple parts of the ego operating. I think that that's the dance between the ego and the subconscious, the subconscious programming, and it's the dance between how society or how our conditioning aids us in identifying versus how we truly feel like we should identify. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so that's my thought on that. Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes.
So how, as a coach, do you help someone who is experiencing a bad trip? Have you...
So that goes into actual facilitation of the journey, which at this point I don't dabble in the facilitation of the actual journey itself. But afterwards, the integration component would be to dig into that a little bit without going too far, without causing a potential re-traumatization, because bad trips can be traumatizing, let's face it. Some people won't do mushrooms after having a bad trip for ever. So I like to look at it through titration, titrating back some of that instead of just being launched right into it. And the work that I do also comes with a pre-integration period. So using the modalities that I mentioned at the beginning to tap into some of that subconscious programming so it's not as jarring when the individual is on the actual journey itself. Does that answer the question?
What does titrating mean?
Titrating, little by little. Yeah, bits and pieces. Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes.
First, thank you very much.
Thank you.
You mentioned that you answer questions or make decisions based on where you feel your soul is in your body, which is the solar plexus. How do you differentiate that from intuition? How does that work? How do those eclipse each other?
Great question. I actually see them as the same thing. I actually see soul and intuition as the same thing. Thank you. Yes.
Have you ever experienced multiple conflicting intuition?
Yes.
You always very clearly one.
No, yes. Okay, so I don't think that the conflicting intuition is multiple intuitions. I think that's conflicting intuition and then mind activity, ego activity. It's whenever my head gets involved and I can't operate from here that I'm like, okay. And usually when I feel that way, I pause. My therapist told me this really great phrase years ago. She said, when in doubt, do nothing. And that was like a game changer for me. Anyone else?
Sure.
Yeah.
So you talked a little bit about bad trips, and I feel like you was kind of alluded to it. But just wondering what your thought is. So some people say there's no such thing as a bad trip. They all can teach you something. I agree for the most part. But part of me thinks that sometimes people would have a really bad trip.
Yeah.
That it may be hard to act just even long term. Like
Sure.
just thrown off. So what is your thought on whether or not you really have a truly bad trip?
I think bad trips do happen. Thank you for that question. I think that bad trips can be very traumatizing. And who am I to say that somebody else's reality isn't what it is? They think that they've had a bad trip. They've had a bad trip, you know? That's their prerogative. I can't say, hey, no, bad trips don't exist, you know? So, thank you for that question. Yes.
So the Zendo project, which is like a harm reduction, they talk about the difference between bad trips and difficult trips. So bad trips are when we have resistance to what's happening in the moment, and difficult trips are difficult, right? Some content is coming up from the unconscious, right? That's unpleasant or painful or whatever it is, but it's not learning how to just observe it and let it pass and go back to our breath or, like ask for support or, get those. But bad and difficult are like two different kinds of trips, right? But again, for me, that was really helpful with like, bad is the resistance, right? It's when we're resisting what's happening.
I love that. Thank you, Keely. So Keely said the Zendo project is a harm reduction for bad trips or difficult trips. And the differentiation between a bad trip and a difficult trip is how we observe it and how we identify with the actual experience. Is that more or less what you're saying?
Yeah, so bad versus difficult, right? Bad is resisting what is happening, and then difficult is just, it's unconscious content coming up that may be like unpleasant or painful or whatever, like that. So,
Okay.
Does
Resistance.
that make sense?
Yes,
So
yes.
it's the resistance that causes the bad trip.
Okay. Resistance causes the bad trip. That clicks.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Megan.
Yeah, what Keely was saying, I had just, when you asked about that trip, I thought my trips have been extremely painful, like actually full of terror, but I don't consider that bad. When I go into a trip or into a journey, I have the intention of learning what I need to learn, what I'm capable of learning, bring me whatever I need to expel, perhaps. And so it's been extremely painful, but I wouldn't call that bad because I can now process things that I wasn't able to process maybe as a child. So, like you said, I think the word bad is the judgment word.
Yeah.
So when you have no judgment and you just accept and surrender to what is, I think it gives it a whole different spin.
Perspective. That's beautiful. Thank you, Megan. Thank you. Yeah, I love that perspective. If anyone didn't hear, Megan said that pain, like she's had very painful, is it okay if I share?
Yes.
She's had very painful experiences, but she wouldn't necessarily constitute that as bad. So I think bad trip is in the eye of the beholder, and that kind of goes back to what our conversation was.
I think that comes with experience too. When you're new to something, new to psychedelics, new to all that, you don't know what to experience. If you haven't had proper, preconditioning and talking and all of the things that lead up to it, then you don't know what to expect. And then your mind goes to that trip where if somebody says, hey, this might be difficult, then you recognize it as just difficult too. So I think inexperience and lack of guides probably affects that as well.
Inexperience and lack of guidance. Yeah, I love that. I think that's also very fruitful. Yes.
You mentioned yoga in the beginning,
Yes.
and I'm thinking about yoga can be like really big. It can be breathing, it can be movements, it can be meditation. Where does it work into your practice, and how do you use it?
Sure. I thank you for asking us. So I think breath work is very powerful. It's something that we can do all the time. And I'm being trained in yoga therapy right now. So yoga therapy is an Amrit method. And the idea behind it is working into the edge in different postures and poses, holding them for an extended period of time, similar to yin in that sense. And in that edge, feeling what comes up in the body, which is our subconscious storage or our somatic storage, and processing that through, maybe via talking, maybe via tears, laughing, throwing up, whatever that may be. So that's where yoga fits in for me. It's actually more of a specified modality of yoga therapy, although movement is also something that I find super powerful with folks.
And it also made me think, at least in the yoga classes I've been to, at the end is like a corpse pose.
Yeah.
Which is like, and then
Integration.
you kind of wake up.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a Japanese one over there.
Yes. Wow, yeah. I love that perspective. So corpse pose, and then you wake up, it's kind of alluding to death. Yeah. And that's the point of integration, is the corpse pose. The idea behind Savasana or corpse pose is to integrate all the teachings that our subconscious or our body's trying to tell us during asana or movement. Thank you for that.
Over here.
Just my thoughts on what you asked. Personally, I mean, kind of the way I view a bad trip is is the person feeling that they're having a bad trip? That's all there is to it, really. It's like, one person's life can be a bad trip, and then they don't, you know what I mean? A person's life can be a bad trip, and then but they're not, they're taking it for granted, or they're kind of numb themselves to it, and they take psychedelics, and so they're just like, either coming into contact with like the realization of how shitty things are for them, and then they get upset, and it's either difficult or bad, that's up to them, but like, I would treat that person, I've experienced it, and what helped me the most from another person, and how I've been able to in turn help people the most when I've seen them, whether it was because they were on drugs or they were just having a mental health crisis, is to not play like I'm a psychologist, but just kind of like give them make a space for them,
Yes.
and then like give them a clean hood. Maybe they're like they just need something soft, or like a blanket, or a pillow, or like a hot cup of tea.
Yep.
Or like something to kind of like decompress,
Regulate them.
comfort them, and like kind of put them, maybe take them a little bit more out of their head and into their fit, like you did, you checked us in.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes even just like giving somebody like some wet wipes so that they can like feel clean.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Big time.
You know, something simple like that can like reset a person.
Absolutely.
You know?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just kind of give them their own space and like offer them things and then like detach, let them
Mhm.
self-soothe and then check in on them just to, but like that, don't try to be like, well, let's talk about what, because that's not what they want probably.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Definitely, definitely. What I'm hearing from you a lot in that is holding space, which is, we can never hold enough space for people to have their experiences. This, like, even not in psychedelic experiences, it's always important to learn how to hold space for someone. And the second thing that I heard was resourcing, or finding regulation, like having something soft, or giving them a hot cup of tea. Like those things, those can be really, really powerful. And like you said, that's sometimes all that somebody needs. They don't need to be talking about it. They don't need to be diving deeper into it, digging into it. It's possible re-traumatization there, and that goes against the titration method. So I love that. Thank you. Yes.
I was thinking about, as people were talking about some of the different things, it seemed like it was an opportunity to look at some of the go back to basic stuff around setting and intention. And what is if you're thinking, oh, I have a crappy life and your head's not in a good place, probably not a good time to eat quarter ounce of mushrooms, right? Or my setting, and I'm gonna have fun with my friend Gary. You know, I hear so many people talk about, oh, I want to go in nature and do all this stuff. And I think of Gary's story on 20 grams of mushrooms with a barking dog from the campground next door, like jarring him awake while he's in full peak, hoping the people at the camp next to them just don't come over. And I'm like, exactly, stay home, just go in your backyard again. But you know, like for me, I like to be in the house. I'm in a certain spot. I got a certain playlist that I do. I'm in my space. You know what I mean? Controlling the things that we can control. And then it sounds like too, there's an opportunity for differentiating between someone like yourself that has that does like integration and is counseled on all that, but there's also value in having someone who's just a trip sitter. Doesn't necessarily have to have all that. Maybe they can't line somebody up or pay somebody to do that right in the moment, but someone to make sure that you're safe and that you're okay. I know I've gotten to a point quickly where I didn't want my wife around. Like I preferred my own space. Sometimes like, I would text her, be like, can you bring me a pillow? And she goes, you want me to come in? I go, no, just leave it outside the door. Sometimes it's like in my own little space. Yep. Having my own experience in it, so it just depends. Sometimes we do things together, but just kind of like knowing yourself and kind of digging in with your expertise. Anything to add to that to help others?
I honestly think that you hit the nail on the head. Like you pretty much said it all. If anybody else has something to add, perhaps.
I have also a question that leads into that. You talk about, get rid of all the negative stuff. Sometimes you can't get rid of the negative stuff.
Right.
So how do you do, when you're doing the trips to deal with the negative stuff, like, a recent cancer diagnosis or something like that, how do you?
Yes, so that's why I think pre-integration, as I like to call it, is necessary, because there's sessions that lead up to the journey where it's holding space, it's feeling into that in a non-psychoactive mindset and getting real about what's happening, so then again, of course that's going to come up, or not of course, but it's likely going to come up and it's likely going to be painful. And if we can develop tools beforehand about how to regulate and resource, then this can be super, super powerful during the journey, because we have those staples and those things that are like, oh, okay, I'm feeling uncomfortable, I can do this, I can grab my stuffed animal that I just need right now, or I can grab my furry pillow, or whatever it may be, whatever that comfort is. So that's why I think it's important to not only post-integrate, but pre-integrate or prep for the journey itself, so that we can develop these tools. Thank you. Yes.
Hi. Thank you. I was wondering, we eat drugs, and does that integrate, or does that interact in any way with what what we eat in a normal life? Like, does it matter what you eat before? Is that important? Like, should you be thinking about what you're eating before?
I definitely think so. Yeah. So part of the regimen that I coach folks through is more of my master's degree is in applied clinical nutrition. So I find the nutritional aspect of psychedelic journeys and just generally super fascinating. So I coach folks through a regimen before the experience, and then of course, like the day of, it's really important to be mindful of what you're eating. I always advocate for clean eating, like fruits and veggies, you know, just getting keeping it simple, you know, back to basics in that sense. Yes.
I'm sorry, just 1 minute. Well, it also depends too on the kind of plant medicine that you're doing as well. Like I saw this when you put a post about putting psychedelic mushrooms on pizza, and they felt like they wanted to vomit the whole time. That sounds miserable.
Yeah, no kidding.
The other thing too, I was at a psychedelics and recovery meeting, and these guys were talking about, you know, it depends on what kind of plant medicine. Mushrooms, you never know what you're going to get. You're on a roller coaster, you don't know how it's going to go. But these guys were advocating for MDMA. It's always smooth, it's all love, it's all predictable. My wife loves that. She's like, mushrooms, I don't know. You're kind of like, because I don't know what's going to come up. But like, so it's like, what are you working on? What's your therapy? You talk about cancer diagnosis, MDMA is probably a better thing. So any guidance for people on knowing, right, like when and how, what to dig into based on what's going to help them based on where they're at and what they're trying to accomplish?
Yes, definitely. So I would say from a personal standpoint, if I have some stuff that's going on in my life that I'm having a tough time dealing with, I don't tend to take mushrooms, because mushrooms launch me into a space where I could potentially have an experience that I'm not ready for. I definitely won't take acid during this time, because then I'm in it for like a good 12 hours. You know, we all know how that goes. So usually when I am experiencing something that I need a little bit of a more objective standpoint or an outsider perspective from, I will take Molly. I find MDMA to be really therapeutic for viewing things objectively, things that are happening that are completely out of our control. It gives us a way to kind of view it with love and empathy. And yeah, and then in circumstances where I feel like I'm able to better stand maybe an eighth of penis envy, I'll go for it, because, you know, that could be a good revamp every once in a while. But of course, the whole set and setting. Yes.
Yeah, and I think it's like the sun and setting is obviously like safe place, but also, you know, like these medicines they're trying to reveal something to us, right, from our unconscious, right? And so we have like the proper supports. We want to move towards like the discomfort or whatever is coming up and not push it down, because then that just pushes it down back into the psyche, right?
Indeed.
So, but again, it's like titrating, meaning going into it a little bit and going back into safety, or having a guide, or, you know, having that safe place so you can like have the cathartic releases or whatever needs to come up. And that's like more a therapeutic experience, right? As opposed to like if you're taking MDMA and going and out doing something recreational. Like that's the one thing about it that like, what if some trauma comes up, right? And you're out in somewhere unknown, or, you know, and then what do you do then? So these things are like, they're strong, right? They're strong medicine.
Yes, I love that, Keely. Thank you. Thank you, thank you. So respecting these medicines, it's really, really important in treating them as such medicines, not drugs. There's a reason why I call them psychedelics, there's a reason why I call it plant medicine, and I don't call it drugs. I think we can all kind of relate to that. Yes?
Hi. I like what you said about, I call it prep work or pre-integration, because I think that is so important to like prepare yourself for going into this thing, you know, not just with like, this is what I want to find, because sometimes I don't really want to have an intention of, I'm searching for this thing. Sometimes it's just exploration.
Yeah.
But the prep work allows me, like you were saying, the tools to know how to breathe, know when to breathe.
Yes.
Know when my body is tight, know how to process these sort of difficult situations so that I'm not contracting and possibly launching myself into a bad trip.
Yes.
Or if I'm in one, I can then breathe and center my way out. And that's like, I mean, that's why it is a medicine, right? It is something that we look at in a lot of ways with sacredness because we're preparing for a journey that we're going on. Versus like, we all do it. We've done it, right? Like, I'm gonna do this, but for now, at this point in my life, I like to do the preparation of that. And I found that it yields better results for me and for my purposes. So thank you for saying that, because I know that like the pop word is integration, but like the prep work is so important because like that's great that we're integrating afterwards, but like we're integrating this experience that wasn't that great. Like, and we could have learned these tools that not only can we use them in this, but we get to use in our everyday life.
Yes.
Yeah, it's really beautiful. So it's like a whole, like you're saying, it's a circular thing of bringing it all together.
Yes.
Yeah, so thank you for that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And
Thank
then
you.
obviously any input you have, sorry.
No, I absolutely loved everything that you just said. Like that's the breath work. Like I said, we can always come back to our breath. We can always come back to our breath. And if we know how to breathe, if we have ways, because breath work, I don't want to say proven because studies suggest that breath work can be very, very effective in soothing the central nervous system. When we're in a sympathetic fight or flight response, if we come back to our breath and if we have certain breathing techniques, we can calm ourselves right down. So I think that breath work is one of the most important and fundamental aspects of like what to learn going into a psychedelic journey. So I think everything that you said was spot on. So thank you for that. Yes.
Hi. I'm interested in learning more about microdosing. Do you feel that having sort of a saturation trip is important when microdosing?
So I don't speak a lot on microdosing because this is something I personally don't have a ton of experience with. A lot of the better chunk of my trips have been full-on trips, and the only thing that I've really microdosed on is acid. So I don't want to speak on that for the sake of not having personal experience. But if I were to say, I would say having a profound trip and then using microdosing as a means to maintain that could be effective. Thank you.
I wanted to read this passage from a book that I read a while ago, and then I want to hear your thoughts too about it. It's from a book called It's from a book called Blueprint: The Evolutionary Origins of a Good Society by Nicholas Christakis. So this quote was really relevant. It was like a few years ago when I read this, but I saved it. It says, "Most experiences that induce such a sense of awe prompt us to feel as if we are transcending our usual frame of reference. Some scientists believe, though it is hard to prove, that awe is an evolved emotion intended to cause a cognitive shift that reduces egocentricity and makes people feel more connected to others. Responding to powerful natural phenomena like thunderstorms or earthquakes or vast expanses of ice or desert with the loss of selfishness and an increase in group bonding might have had survival value to ancient humans. A key feature of awe, psychologists Dr. Keltner and Jonathan Haidt have argued, is that it quiets self-interest and makes individuals feel part of a larger whole. According to primatologist Jane Goodall, chimpanzees experience something similar. They can be amazed by things outside themselves and gaze dreamily at waterfalls and sunsets, which suggests a possible evolutionary origin for this feeling."
Nice.
Yeah.
I knew you'd get on the mic eventually.
Wow, I loved that. I loved that. Who said that?
It was from the book, it was Nicholas Christakis, the book The Blueprint: Evolutionary Origin of a Good Society. That was the name of the book. He's a Yale, I think he's not at Yale anymore, but he did a lot of thing on social networks, a lot of research on social networks and stuff. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that's it. That's very. Did you have a thought on that?
I had to say something.
Yeah.
Wild. And I forgot what it was.
No,
but
it's
it was about set and setting, and I just,
Okay.
you don't have to be in the perfect mindset to go into one of these journeys, right? It works for people who are depressed. It works for people who are, going through trauma, whatever it is. You can work through it, but you have to do the prep work in order to do it effectively.
Yeah.
And I wanted to just bring up something that Sabina, when she did her talk, talked about with the altars, is having an object or something that grounds you in your space, so you can reference it to bring you back into that moment. I mean, the breath work is very powerful for sure, but I think that the one really horrific trip that I did have, I think if I would have done that prep work, I may have been able to bring myself out of it somewhat. And so that's just something I would recommend, is get something.
Grounding object.
Yes. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. 100%. Yeah. Totally agreed. Totally agreed. Yes.
So that could just kind of build off of that. I think like when people are talking about set and setting, and I think that lady over here was like, you were talking about like the different ways. So like it's like the skill too. Like you can start to expand and go deeper and deeper into your journeys when you have these different skills, like to be able to like increase your window of tolerance inside of the experience. Like whether it's like breathing or internal or external resourcing, or like knowing when to ask for help, knowing the different ways like to titrate yourself out of it. Like if like sometimes just sitting up, taking your eye mask off, or like getting a drink of water, or depending on what kind of medicine you're doing, like like grounding yourself, like with different things, like even like sometimes eating something or going outside, or and then increasing those skills to be able to navigate the different experiences,
Yes.
which is also a big part of like preparation.
Yes.
And like
Having a game plan, like just knowing
Okay.
that there's something you can do.
Right,
Yeah.
so like
Yeah.
the preparation, but then like even like within each experience, like being able to build on those skills.
Yeah. Big time. Big time. Yeah. And then if we, because obviously psychedelics can warrant some neuroplasticity. So if we have these methods and we're using them during our psychedelic experience, this is long lasting. Like this can actually potentially be rewiring our brain. So that's also a plus. I mean, along with the many, many others. But yes.
I'm just starting to get into psychedelics, and so far every time I use them, like I set an intention, and but oftentimes it seems like the medicine has a very different idea of what it wants to show me. But like, do you think that ultimately what it's showing me is leading back to the intention?
Have you noticed any synchronicities?
What do you mean?
From setting your intention and then what's happened afterwards?
Yeah, I noticed a change, like I've been like microdosing, and so
Okay.
I noticed a change with those intentions I set, but like I just did my first macro dose in a long time, and it was like completely different than what I went into it with. And so I mean, it was amazing, and it was things that needed to surface, but it was just I kind of left like, okay, that was awesome, but it wasn't I don't know if it was related to my intention.
Okay. Yeah, understood. Understood. My take on that is that I think microdosing offers a bit more of like offers a bit more manipulation. So we're able to manipulate that a little bit more, maybe be able to set our intentions and see the fruits of that. Whereas if you're going to take a heroic dose, you're in it. the medicine's going to give you whatever answers it feels you need. So thank you for that. Thank you for your vulnerability.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yes.
I think you might be able to think of microdosing, like if this was a glass and you tap it, that's microdosing. Taking a heroic dose is you hit it with a hammer and it gets smashed. You have no idea what the shards are going to be, where they're going to end up. So this is one thing, and the other is another thing. There's no control.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yes. I haven't looked over here in a minute.
I got to go for hours. But anyway, so I want to touch a little bit back on like bad trips, and I think they're one of the more interesting aspects, and it's one of the more areas that you can learn in these things. And we've talked about a number of different really important aspects of them. And I feel like we kind of stepped around this a little bit, but I don't always want to say it out loud, especially for people that aren't as experienced. But sometimes they can be the most beautiful. When the really challenging trips and the quote-unquote bad ones, sometimes they can be in the bigger picture. They can be really, really beautiful experiences.
Yes.
They can be the most life-changing in a way. Like,
yes.
yeah, it's nice to just drift through the cosmos and this mystical blanket and see all kinds of cool stuff, and then float back down. But sometimes it's the time when you really get into it. You really get into places where you're not really sure how you're gonna get out of there.
Yes.
That at the end, when you do get out, you're like, okay, I get it now. And actually, I wanted to, off of what Gary was saying, so I sat with medicine maybe three weeks ago or so, at this point, 4 weeks ago, and it had been my first journey of that sort in a little while. And I was getting ready, I did a lot of preparations for it, and that day, a few hours beforehand, the talk that Sabina had done, it popped in my mind. It was the first one of these I had come to. I think I've been to everyone since, I think. Maybe this one. But she talked about the altar. And at first I was like, okay, that's a cool idea. Like, I don't know, I'm not going to make an altar. Like, it's not, I don't know, it's not my thing. Like, I don't even have stuff to make an altar with. And then a couple hours beforehand, I decided to do it. I was like, you know what? She thought, yeah, I'm going to make an altar. No idea why. And like this little coffee table has nothing on it, and I made an altar. I got like this shawl, like this really beautiful print that I put on top of it, and like I just happened to find random things. And by the end, I was like, crap, I could keep going and like put more things on here. But anyway, so it was there, and I had like a nature scene or something up on the TV, like stuck there. And I put my blindfold on, so I was in the trip, and it was very challenging in a number of ways. And then the trip was going on and on. I was like, man, I'm exhausted physically and mentally. And I sat up and I took the blindfold off, and the altar was there, and I was like, oh my God, that is one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. Mm-hmm. And like the way that it all came together was just, it was mind-blowing. Like it was not my first rodeo by any stretch of the imagination, but there was something about that experience and like the way that all came together that was just like, that was something that I had never really experienced before.
Wow.
Like that all coming together. I sat there for a couple hours. The playlist hit in an appropriate way for that thing. And one point I was just laughing. I started laughing hysterically. Like, medicine knew what I needed. It didn't care what I wanted. It knew what I needed. It kicked my ass for a little while, and then it provided me with this beautiful, beautiful moment of things coming together and like this sense of cleanliness. So, but yeah, they can be some of the best in the long term when they are challenging and rough. But an altar, never done it. I recommend it. There's something really cool about having that piece of like different pieces of me that I was things that were good, things that were like memorable for me, but also things that I wanted to maybe cleanse or maybe I wanted to disconnect from different aspects of my life, and it was a really, really cool experience.
That's awesome. That sounds super beautiful, and thank you for sharing that, and thank you for your vulnerability.
That was the most important thing about her talk, was the fact that an altar doesn't have to be an eagle feather and a dream catcher and all these things that you think of. It's personal to you. Whatever it is that's personal and important to you that you can bring to that table and put it in front of you so that you have something to stay grounded in the moment and in the present. That's what it's all about. And that was so powerful when because I thought, altar woo-woo, I'm not getting into stupid, but 100%. Her talk was the most powerful one, hands down to me, because it changed it just flipped me completely. I was like, oh, I'm in. I do this all the time. I don't even know I do it. So.
And altars are a really good way to integrate too, because you get to honor these parts of yourself that like came up that you're viewing differently.
Yes.
Like, and you get to put this like little version of you or this whatever on an altar and like honor that for a couple weeks or whatever. It's just a really good practice.
The whole next day I was like staring at it, like looking at the different things and like, yep, let's like think about that, or like, oh wow, that came, like something like that came up, and it was Like I literally just like stared at it. Yeah, it was like that part of it too was just as important as the immediate
I actually would like to share a personal anecdote about that because I have something interesting about that. So, one of my first acid trips, I was at a music festival, very small grassroots. I'm from upstate New York, very small grassroots festival in upstate New York, and my trip was fairies. Like everybody around me was fairies. I was having these auditory hallucinations of the little twinkle as fairies like go by and have like a little giggle, and the whole stage was like a fairy house, and this was bizarre. I went into this trip with zero expectations, and the next day after I had sobered up, so to speak, I'm looking at the base of this tree, this big old tree, and I'm looking at the base of it, and I see there's something like orange that's just a little bit sticking out of the ground. I was like, what the heck is that? So I started like digging it out naturally because I'm an Aries, I'm very curious. And so I'm digging it out, and it's this little mushroom fairy house, like a little statue. And it was in Amanita muscaria, and it was just like a little statue. And I had it up on my dashboard for years until it got too hot and the Velcro kicked the can, so to speak, kicked the bucket. But yeah, I still have the little fairy house, and it was just very interesting. It was like, wow, okay, universe, heard, like a little synchronicity moment there. So that's my personal experience with altars and things like that. So fairies are real. They're very real. They're very real. So if anybody else has anything to share, I'd love to chat privately afterwards. But thank you all very, very much for holding the space for me. I was very nervous initially, and everybody was very kind and welcoming. I can see it in everybody's eyes. So thank you all very, very much.